Welcome to another deep dive, and today, let's just say it's perfect for a Friday.
Coffee. Yeah, who doesn't love a good cup of coffee to kick off the weekend, or really any day?
Exactly. And for this deep dive, you've given us some really intriguing notes on coffee chemistry. We'll be focusing on flavor compounds, also the reactions that happen during roasting.
Oh, yeah, the roasting is crucial, right? And then, of course, we can't forget caffeine. I mean, that's what many people are after.
Right. Got to get that energy boost. But we'll also talk about different brewing methods and even touch on the health benefits of coffee, specifically antioxidants.
Absolutely. Sounds like we've got a lot to cover, so should we just dive right in?
Let's get caffeinated to do this. So first things first, just how complex is coffee, really? I mean, we drink it every day, but I don't think many of us stop to consider the chemistry behind it.
You're absolutely right. It's way more complex than most people realize. I mean, did you know that coffee contains hundreds of flavor compounds?
Hundreds. Seriously?
Yeah, seriously. And it's not just about the caffeine, although that's certainly a big part of it for many. But these compounds work together to create this huge, like, symphony of flavors. They contribute to that rich aroma and the different taste profiles we find in different coffees.
So it's kind of like wine tasting then. Like you have those notes of chocolate, fruit, nuts, all those subtle flavors that we associate with different roasts.
Exactly. It's a very similar concept. You've got different beans, different roasts, and even different brewing methods all contributing to those unique flavors. It's like the terroir and the winemaking process impact a bottle of wine.
That's amazing. So let's move on to the roasting process. What's actually happening to those beans when they're being roasted?
Well, that's where the real magic happens, I think. It's a chemical transformation, really. You're not just turning the beans brown, you're unlocking the aroma and taste that we associate with coffee. It's a process called pyrolysis, and it involves using heat to break down those complex molecules within the beans.
Pyrolysis. Okay. So what's happening during pyrolysis?
Basically, the heat breaks down these big, complex molecules, and it creates new ones. And these new molecules are responsible for the aroma and taste. Think of it like alchemy. You're transforming raw ingredients into something totally different.
That's a great analogy. And speaking of transformations, I've always been curious about the different roast levels. Light, medium, dark. How do they affect the final flavor?
Oh, the roast level is huge. It plays a huge role in shaping the coffee's overall flavor profile. For example, a light roast will preserve more of the bean's natural acidity, and you get those delicate flavors. You might even pick up on fruity notes or even floral hints.
Interesting. Okay, what about dark roasts?
Dark roast, well, that's where those bold, smoky, even like bittersweet flavors come to the forefront. The longer roasting time breaks down acids and develops richer, more intense flavors. Think of it like cooking, right? Different levels of heat change the flavor profile of your food. It's the same idea with coffee.
That makes sense. Okay, so we've got hundreds of flavor compounds and this amazing chemical transformation happening during roasting. But let's be honest, many of us are reaching for that cup of coffee for the caffeine. So what is caffeine exactly, and what does it actually do in our bodies?
Caffeine is an alkaloid, which is a naturally occurring stimulant. You find it in coffee, of course, but also in tea, cacao, and other plants. It's what gives you that jolt of alertness and focus.
So more than just a wake-up call.
Yeah, definitely more than that. It acts on our central nervous system, but its effects can go beyond just keeping you awake. Caffeine can actually affect your mood, your cognitive function, even athletic performance. It's pretty amazing.
That is interesting. And while we're on the topic of how we actually consume coffee, I've always wondered about those different brewing methods. French press, pour over, espresso. Do they really make that much of a difference?
They absolutely do. Brewing is all about the art of extraction. You're trying to carefully pull those soluble compounds from the grounds. Different methods use different techniques like different water temperatures, contact times, and pressures, and all those variables impact the final flavor.
All right, so could you break that down a little bit? Like, what's the difference between, say, a French press and a pour over?
Sure. So a French press uses a longer steeping time. This allows for a fuller extraction. You get more of the coffee's oils and compounds, which gives you a richer, more full-bodied cup with a heavier mouthfeel.
And what about a pour over? What makes that different?
Well, a pour-over uses a slower, more controlled flow of water through the grounds, so that gives you a cleaner, brighter cup of coffee. It kind of highlights the more delicate flavors and nuances.
Wow, it's amazing how just those subtle differences in brewing can make such a big difference in the final cup.
Exactly. And the great thing is you can experiment with these methods at home and find what you like best.
So we've covered a lot of ground already. We've talked about those flavor compounds, the roasting process, caffeine, and brewing methods. But what about the health benefits of coffee? I know there's been a lot of talk about antioxidants. What's the deal with that?
Yeah, antioxidants are a big deal. And coffee is packed with them. They're beneficial compounds that help neutralize those harmful free radicals in our bodies, those unstable molecules that can damage cells. And that damage can contribute to aging and various diseases.
Wait, so you're telling me coffee isn't just delicious and energizing, but it's actually good for me too?
There's growing evidence that suggests moderate coffee consumption may offer a range of health benefits, things like protection against chronic diseases and even supporting cognitive function.
So we've got flavor, energy, and potential health benefits all in one cup. That's pretty impressive. But are there any common misconceptions about coffee, especially about its chemistry, that you've come across?
Oh, absolutely. I think one of the biggest ones is that darker roasts have more caffeine, but that's not actually true. Yeah, the roasting process breaks down some of the caffeine, so a lighter roast might actually give you a slightly higher caffeine boost.
Well, that's definitely a myth busted. Anything else?
Another one is that decaf coffee is completely caffeine-free, and while the decaffeination process does remove a significant amount, there are still trace amounts. So you might get a little bit of a boost from decaf, it's just much less than regular coffee.
It sounds like there's a lot more to coffee than meets the eye. We've covered so much, from those fascinating flavor compounds to the science of roasting, the power of caffeine. And of course, who knew there were potential health benefits hidden in every cup?
And we're just getting started. There's still so much more to explore in the world of coffee chemistry.
I'm ready for another cup already. But before we dive into our next round, I think it would be interesting to explore the world of coffee bean varieties. What do you think?
Let's do it. There's a whole world of flavors waiting to be discovered, so ready to jump into the world of coffee beans. It's pretty fascinating. Each variety has its own unique chemical profile, and that translates directly to the flavors you get in your cup.
Yeah, that's what I'm excited to learn about. I mean, I know there are a ton of different types of beans out there, but I don't really know what makes them so unique.
Well, let's start with one of the most popular varieties, Arabica. It makes up about 60% of the world's coffee production, and it's known for its smooth, balanced flavor. You get those notes of chocolate, caramel, and nuts.
That sounds delicious. What about some of the other varieties? What else is out there?
Another common one is Robusta, and as the name suggests, it's got a more robust, bolder flavor. Robusta beans actually have a higher caffeine content too, and they often have these earthy and even rubbery notes.
Oh yeah, I've definitely tasted those bolder flavors in some coffees. So these flavor differences, it all comes down to the chemical makeup of the beans.
Exactly. It's all about the chemistry. For example, Arabica beans have higher levels of sugars and lipids, and those contribute to that sweetness and smoothness. Robusta beans, on the other hand, have more chlorogenic acids. Those are what give them that bitterness and intensity.
Interesting. I actually read somewhere that the growing conditions and processing methods can also affect the flavor. Is that true?
Absolutely. The environment where those beans are grown matters. Things like altitude, soil composition, and rainfall, they all play a role in shaping the flavor. Like coffee grown at higher altitudes, that tends to have a more complex flavor profile, and that's because the beans mature more slowly.
So it's kind of like wine then. The terroir plays a big part in the final taste.
You got it. And just like wine, different processing methods can influence the flavor. For instance, you have washed coffees, where they ferment and wash the beans to remove the fruit pulp. Those tend to have a cleaner, brighter flavor. But then there's natural processed coffee, where the beans are dried with the fruit pulp still on, and those often have fruitier, more complex flavors.
It's incredible how many factors go into that final cup of coffee. It's like a whole journey from the farm to my mug.
It really is. It's a fascinating journey, and there's always something new to discover.
Speaking of discoveries, you mentioned earlier that coffee contains those beneficial antioxidants. Can we talk a little bit more about what they are and how they benefit us?
Sure. Antioxidants are compounds that basically help protect our cells from damage. And that damage is caused by these things called free radicals. You can think of free radicals as unstable molecules that can lead to oxidative stress, and that's linked to aging and a lot of diseases.
So these antioxidants are like little superheroes fighting off the bad guys.
Haha, yeah, that's a great way to think about it. And coffee is packed with these antioxidants, especially these things called polyphenols. Chlorogenic acid is one of them.
Wait, isn't chlorogenic acid what makes coffee bitter?
It is. It's funny how something that contributes to the bitterness can also be good for you.
So coffee's delicious, it wakes me up, and it might even help me stay healthy. That's amazing. Are there specific health benefits linked to coffee consumption?
There's research suggesting that coffee consumption might be linked to a reduced risk of certain chronic diseases. We're talking type 2 diabetes, heart disease, maybe even some types of cancer.
That's great news. I've always heard such mixed things about coffee and health, so it's good to know there's some science backing up the good stuff.
Yeah, but it's important to remember that most of these studies have focused on moderate coffee consumption. Too much caffeine can have negative effects, so like anything, it's best to enjoy it in moderation.
Moderation, 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 that's the key, right? But, I am curious about the caffeine itself. Earlier you mentioned that it acts on our central nervous system. Can you tell me a little more about how it works?
Sure, caffeine is a stimulant, right? And what it does is block this neurotransmitter called adenosine. Adenosine is usually what makes you feel sleepy and relaxed. So when caffeine comes along and blocks the adenosine receptors, it's like it prevents those feelings of tiredness. It promotes alertness instead.
So caffeine is basically tricking our brains into thinking we're not tired.
Yeah, you could say that. It interferes with those natural signals that tell your body to slow down and rest.
That makes a lot of sense. That's why I feel so much more focused and ready to go after my coffee. But I've also noticed that some people seem to be way more sensitive to caffeine than others. Why is that?
Well, there are individual genetic differences that come into play. It's how quickly our bodies process caffeine. Some people, they're fast metabolizers, so they break it down quickly and the effects don't last as long. Others are slow metabolizers, which means the caffeine stays in their system longer and they might feel the effects for a longer time.
That explains why some people can drink espresso before bed and sleep fine, while others are up all night after just 1 cup in the morning. So genetics is a big part of it.
It is, and what's even more fascinating is that our perception of taste can also be influenced by genetics.
Wait, really? You mean whether I like a certain type of coffee might be partly because of my DNA?
Yep. Some people are genetically predisposed to be more sensitive to bitterness, for example, and that definitely affects how they experience coffee's flavor.
So maybe some people naturally prefer those bolder, more bitter roasts, while others are drawn to a smoother cup. It's all in the genes.
Exactly. It's incredible how our genes influence so much of our coffee experience, from how our bodies handle the caffeine to how we perceive those complex flavors.
That is super interesting. It really makes you realize that coffee is more than just a drink. It's a reflection of who we are, biologically speaking, and what we like.
I agree. And it makes coffee such a fascinating subject to study. There's always something new to learn. Speaking of new discoveries, are there any cutting-edge developments in coffee science that you're particularly excited about? What's coming up in the world of coffee research?
Oh, wow, good question. What is brewing, so to speak, in coffee research?
Well, one area that's really interesting is the research into coffee waste and its potential uses.
Coffee waste. You mean the grounds after we've brewed a pot? I never would have thought those could be used for anything.
I know, right? But it turns out those spent grounds are full of valuable compounds. Researchers are looking at ways to use them for things like biofuels and fertilizers, even for sustainable building materials.
Wow. So even after we've enjoyed our cup of coffee, the science is still going strong.
It's true. It's a great example of how we can use science to find new uses for things that we used to think of as trash. It's sustainable and creative all at the same time.
It's amazing how everything is connected. From the chemical reactions in roasting to finding new uses for coffee waste, it's a full circle of innovation. Okay, so we've talked a lot about the science, but I have to ask, what do you think makes the perfect cup of coffee?
It's a tough one. I think it's really subjective. It depends on what you like. But for me, it starts with high-quality beans that are freshly ground and brewed with care. It's about appreciating the whole process, from that first whiff of aroma to that last sip.
So it's not just about the taste, it's about the experience, that whole journey from bean to cup.
You got it. It's about appreciating the artistry and the science that goes into making a great cup of coffee.
Okay, well, before we wrap things up, I have one more question for you. What's one piece of advice you'd give to all the coffee lovers out there listening?
Don't be afraid to experiment. Try different beans, different roasting styles, different brewing methods. There's a whole world of coffee out there to discover. You might just find your new favorite cup.
I love that. Explore and let your taste buds lead the way. Well, I think it's time to shift gears for the final part of our deep dive. Let's talk about the psychological effects of coffee. I've always found that to be super intriguing. It's funny, right? We think about having a cup of coffee, and it's like this simple thing. But when you actually start thinking about it, it's amazing how much it can affect us.
Totally.
We've talked about caffeine and the chemical effects, but what about the psychological side of coffee? Like, how does it change our mood or help us focus? Does it make us more creative?
Well, that's the thing, right? We get the caffeine part, the physiology, but when you talk psychology, it gets a lot more complicated. The effects are different for everybody.
Yeah. And I always think about that because you've got some people, coffee is their creative fuel. Like they needed to brainstorm and come up with ideas. But then others, they get all jittery and anxious from it. And they say it actually blocks their creativity. So which is it? What's the real story?
There's still a lot to figure out about how coffee interacts with our brains. And it's different for everyone. I mean, there is research that suggests moderate caffeine can boost certain brain functions, like you'll be more alert, you can focus better, and even solve problems more easily.
So that morning coffee could actually be getting us ready to tackle creative challenges.
It's definitely possible. But, and this is important, the key is moderation. Remember we talked about how too much caffeine can backfire. It can make you anxious, make it hard to sleep, and even mess with your thinking. It's all about finding that sweet spot where caffeine helps, not hurts.
So it's almost like a balancing act, right? You've got the caffeine giving you that boost, but then everyone has their own limit before it stops being helpful.
Right. And on top of that, you can't forget things like how are you feeling that day? Are you sleep deprived? How stressed are you? All that plays into how coffee affects you too.
It's not just the coffee then. It's the coffee plus everything else going on inside us.
It all works together. It's like a whole picture view of coffee, the chemicals, and how we experience it mentally.
This has been such an eye-opening deep dive. I mean, we've covered so much ground, from the tiniest caffeine molecules to what happens in our brains when we drink coffee and everything in between.
I know. It's really amazing to consider how much there is to coffee. It's way more than just a drink. It ties into our biology, our preferences, even culture plays a role.
It's a ritual for people. It brings people together. It wakes us up physically and mentally.
Exactly. And as scientists keep studying coffee, we'll learn even more about how it impacts us.
Well, I'd say we've definitely brewed up a really stimulating conversation today. We've explored the incredible chemistry behind coffee, all those flavors and aromas. We've talked about how it's made, from roasting the beans to the different ways to brew it. And of course, we can't forget those potential health benefits.
It's been great to share all this with you and with everyone listening. I hope we've inspired you to think a little differently about your next cup of coffee.
I think we have. So to everyone out there, the next time you have a coffee, really take a moment to think about it. There's so much going on in that one cup, from the science and the way it's grown to your own personal experience and what it means to you. And until next time, keep exploring and questioning, because there's always something new to discover in the world around us.